Welcome to Ask BG Anything number 2. It's Tuesday night, it's 10 o'clock, and this is the second installment of this relatively new feature on the channel. You know, we did it two or three weeks ago and people seem to enjoy it. We got a good few questions in, and we've got a good few questions in for second installment. Just put it on mute in real time. But we got a good few questions in ahead of this week's one as well. So yeah, looking forward to it, and hopefully we'll get some interaction later on in the episode. Anyway, so shout out to everyone who's already joined. You can see there's 15 people already watching live. Shout out to everyone in the chat. What we're going to do in this, I've had a load of questions sent in on my Facebook and on my Twitter. For future reference, if you'd like to send in a question so that it can be answered live on air, the links to my social media, as ever, are in the description to this video. You can follow me on Twitter at Boxing Gossip. You can add me as a friend on Facebook. A link to my Facebook profile is in the description below. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all of the questions that I've had sent in. I'm going to read out the questions and then give answers to them. If we've got time left, I will go to the chat at the end and we can take live questions from the chat. But I am going to give priority to people who've sent in the questions in advance via my social media. So no offense to anyone in the chat, but there's just a lot to get through, and we'll do our very, very best to go to the chat after we've rattled through it. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get into it. Number of milestones on the channel. We've hit 5,000 subscribers, got the first ever video to do 50,000 views, and got the first ever video which hit 300 thumbs up. So yeah, massive milestones on all three. You know, really pleased with some of the growth. Obviously, a large part of that down to the massive fight this weekend, which has created a huge buzz in boxing and probably created a lot more people tuning into boxing channels on YouTube and that sort of thing. But yeah, thanks very much to everyone who shared those videos over the weekend, to everyone who supported them by watching them, by hitting the thumbs up, by, you know, doing what you guys do. So massively appreciate it, and it's meaning we're seeing a little bit of growth at my end, which is always appreciated. I can see we got loads of regulars in the chat. We got Rob, Daniel, Marat, Jared, Stevie, Will, Tom, the Wizard, Grant, Sin Champion, Karen. Hope everyone's doing well, guys. And I'm going to start by reading out the questions that I received on Facebook. We'll then go on to the ones I received on Twitter, and then if we got time left at the end, we'll go to the chat. So without further ado, oh no, I keep saying without further ado, one other bit of housekeeping. I've heard, and this is not confirmed, I've heard the Joseph Parker fight will be shown on Sky this weekend. And yeah, that's good news for us UK boxing fans, because it potentially means we'll get some Saturday morning boxing to watch here on Sky. It's good news for Joseph Parker fans. It means that Parker's getting more exposure here in the UK. It probably means there's a higher probability that Parker will get some big name opponents in the UK in future. So without further ado, let's go into it. The first question comes from Andrew. And Andrew asks, predict when and if Fury returns to 100% his old self. What year, what month will that be? How many bum return fights will Fury have before he faces a top three? Also, predict if Huey and Tyson will be banned, and if for Nandrolone, and if long, how long the suspension will be. Cheers, BG. Right, good question, Andrew. So a few little questions within that. So let's take them one at a time. Predict when and if Fury returns to 100% his old self. I've got to say, I'm actually skeptical that he ever returns to being 100% his old self. This is a guy who has done huge damage to his career and huge damage to his body by the way he's blown up. You know, Fury's a guy who relies on movement. He's a guy who relies on speed. He relies on reactions and instincts. And for me, being out of the ring for so long, being so much overweight, being so inactive are all things that are probably going to lead to a decrease in those attributes, especially as you naturally get older. Realistically, for me, have we seen peak Tyson Fury? Most likely. Will we see him 100% back to being his old self? That's a toss of the coin, Andrew. You know, my guess is as good as yours, or your guess is as good as mine even. If I really had to nail my colours to the mast, I'd say probably not. I'd say we've probably seen the best of Tyson Fury, which is a great, great shame. But, you know, we'll see. I hope that we're wrong, and could easily be wrong. He certainly looked very, very good on the pads. He's only 28 years old. And, you know, if he can get himself in good shape and get active, maybe there's a chance we could see the same Fury that we saw against Vladimir Klitschko. How many bum fights will Fury have before he faces a top 3 heavyweight? Well, I think he should have 2. I think he should have 2 highly durable opponents, maybe one inside the top 50, one inside the top 20, ease him back into it. You know, he is very, very, very inactive, and he's very out of condition. So I personally, from a legacy perspective, wouldn't want to see him chucked in straight away with a Joshua or with a Wilder. I think really it depends what Fury's motivation is. If Fury's motivation is to come back to the sport to make a few quid, sure, he can fight Anthony Joshua relatively quickly. I'm sure that's a fight that Eddie Hearn and Joshua would take at the minute. And Fury can maybe, you know, have that fight, put 2 thumbs up to boxing, and sail off into the sunset with 15 or 20 million quid in his back pocket. If he's got genuine motivation to regain his titles and to be the best heavyweight in the world, I think he should have a minimum of 2 tune-up fights. I think the condition he's been in and the length of time he's been out of the ring means he will need that before stepping up to top level. And I think that's 2 as a minimum, realistically. So that's my thoughts on that. Predict if Tyson and Huey will be banned, and if long, how long the suspension will be. To be honest, predicting whether they'll be banned, again, I don't have any of the information, and it would really be pure gut instinct. But I'll tell you what, in my experience, boxing bans can often run from the date of the failed test. And given how long that both Tyson and Huey have been inactive, I don't think it's actually impossible that if they were banned from the date of the failed test, they could be allowed to box almost immediately. For example, if Fury got an 18-month ban from the date of that failed test, surely he'd be pretty much able to box about now. You know, even if they gave him a 2-year ban, doesn't that mean that he'd be able to box? Well, I can't actually remember when the failed test was exactly. I'm doing it from the Klitschko fight. But even if they gave him a 2-year ban running from that Klitschko fight, that would mean he'd be able to box towards the back end of that this year. And realistically, he probably needs that long to get in good shape anyway. So, yeah, there's my answers on that one, Andrew. I think it's crystal ball time. You know, it's as much a guess from my perspective as it is from anyone's. I don't have the full info, but you know that's my instinct. Can see we're up to about 150 people live. Evening, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. I am giving priority to the guys you've sent in the questions on social media, so I'll come to the chat after I've rattled through all of those if we've got time at the end, guys. Scott has put, I think it would be good to address. Okay, so this is a separate question from Scott now. He's put, it would be good to address if we think Anthony Joshua was hurt when he was knocked down by Klitschko, or as Eddie Hearn stated, was he just gassed and couldn't stand up? I know my opinion, but it would be good to get a breakdown. For me, he was definitely hurt. I actually thought he was slightly wobbled. Even when he got up, I thought he was on unsteady legs, and he was in survival mode for the rest of that round. The punch that Vladimir Klitschko landed on him was a huge right hand. I know there's clips of it doing all over on social media. For me, the guy was very, very much hurt. With that being said, I think he was clearly completely gassed. He was completely out of energy. And surely punches like that are probably going to hurt you more and do more damage when you're that gassed and when you're that low energy at the end of a fight. I think if that punch had landed on nearly every heavyweight in the sport, they'd have been hurt. So I actually think it would be more odd if Joshua wasn't hurt by that punch than if he was. And, you know, the fact that he went down, the fact he took 8 or 9 to get up, I think it was 8 or 9 anyway, maybe I've got that wrong. And the fact that he was on unsteady legs for the rest of that round, for me, yeah, I think he was very much hurt. Saw he was tired, and I think the two are very much linked. But I think to blame that punch purely on tiredness, to blame the fact he went down purely on tiredness would be incorrect, because he got hit loads of other times and didn't go down when he was tired. So, you know, I don't think there's any coincidence that the time he went down was off a hellacious Klitschko right hand, if you like. Thanks for the question, Scott. Paul, so up to Paul, has put, do you prefer respectful fight bills like Klitschko Joshua or fake beefs like Chisora White? Okay, I'm going to be honest. I do like the beef in a build-up for boxing. You know, I think having a beef in boxing massively creates hype. And for me, maybe it's because I'm a casual fan at heart, I don't know. But for me, it does get my blood racing when there's a beef. I don't think Chisora White was a fake beef. I actually think that was a legit, genuine beef. And I think the two guys really, really didn't like each other. So for me, the preference would actually be a real beef, like Chisora and White was in that instance. What I do prefer is a respectful build-up compared to an obviously manufactured beef. So when I'm talking about manufactured beef, what I'm talking about is Luke Campbell versus Tommy Coyle. You know, two guys who are clearly mates, who decided they didn't like each other to try and sell a fight. Rocky Fielding versus Callum Smith, which was a really awkward and unnecessary fake beef. Spike O'Sullivan versus Chris Eubank Jr., where Spike O'Sullivan admitted before the fight, you know, and the gloves are off, that there was never any bad feeling there. He was actually just shouting him out to get a fight. You know, I think those fake beefs are absolutely cringeworthy. But for me, you know, when you get a genuine beef, when you get some real bad feeling, and for me, Chisora White was one of those occasions, you know, that's when it gets really, really mega interesting for me. Steve has put, what's the potential for Joshua to box all around the world in the next few years? As Eddie says, pay-per-view numbers won't be so high at stupid o'clock in the morning. Do you know what, Steve? I agree with that. You know, Eddie Hearn's always talked about breaking the Chinese market with Joshua, trying to break the US market with him. I'm not so sure, to be honest. Obviously, Eddie Hearn knows far more about these things than I do, and I wouldn't for 1 second suggest otherwise. But realistically, Joshua is a huge sensation here in the UK. Now, the rumours are, and the pay-per-view rumours are exactly that, rumours, but I think we've heard strong indications that he broke the UK pay-per-view record. So he's now outselling the likes of Mayweather Hatton. He's outselling the likes of Froch Groves 2. He's doing those sort of numbers, probably doing in excess of 1.2 million pay-per-view buys. And that's also selling 90,000 tickets at the National Stadium at Wembley. You know, so Joshua is an absolute sensation. And if he's already at that profile at this stage of his career, you know, age 27, and he's got all these big fights ahead of him, Wilder, Fury, Parker, etc., it's potentially going to get even bigger and even bigger. And Joshua's core audience, I know he's got the potential to be a global star. Obviously, getting him broadcast on HBO and Showtime in the US was a great move from Eddie Hearn. I know he's got that potential to be a global star. But if the core audience is the US and you're making so much money you know, to have these fights, why do you want to go out to China and fight in a fight that will be televised at what, 6 in the morning over here that no one will wait up to buy? You know, you're not going to get one of the big name opponents out in China. I appreciate there's the potential to sort of turn him into this global brand and, you know, try and make him some sort of icon or something like that. But I wouldn't neglect the core market. I think momentum in building someone's career is absolutely pivotal. Absolutely pivotal. And I think if Joshua, you know, had 3 months off, then went to fight in China, then had 3 months off, I actually think his profile could even potentially drop in the UK. I think it would be to his benefit to have, you know, continual fights at Wembley Stadium, one a year, for the next 3 or 4 years, if that's possible. And you know, UK domestic fights. I mean, don't be surprised if Chisora beats Helenius, if we see Joshua Chisora in a voluntary. Don't be surprised to see a Dillian Whyte rematch. Eddie Hearn knows that a domestic heavyweight class, especially one with bad blood, will always sell. And I think surely those are more attractive options than trying to get him out in China and build him there. But, you know, that's just my opinion, Steve. I guess Joshua's got the potential to be completely new and uncharted territory within boxing. Up to about 190 people watching live, so shout out to everyone in the chat. I'm going through questions received on my social media, which I'm giving priority at the start, and we'll come to the chat right at the end. So I'm not looking at questions from the chat right now, but I will do after we've gone through the ones on social media. If you are one of the 190 people, shout out to everyone for joining live. Please take the time to hit subscribe and hit the thumbs up button if you haven't done so already. And we'll go on to Darren's question. So thank you, Darren. He's put, would Wilder or Parker come to fight AJ in the UK, especially with the poor cards we're seeing? I think both of them would definitely want to do that. I think that Anthony Joshua represents the biggest fight in heavyweight boxing for the likes of Wilder, Parker, Fury, etc. I mean, those guys saw what happened on Saturday night. Deontay Wilder was there. He was commentating for Sky on the UK broadcast. And, you know, I can't be the only one who felt they saw a huge amount of excitement coming from Deontay Wilder. You know, I really seemed to get the impression that he was, you know, very, very excited to be at Wembley Stadium, to see the buzz from the crowd, to see people going mental when Joshua was fighting, and just to see what a big occasion it was. You know, Parker, Wilder, they're big names in their respective areas. I know Parker's a big name in New Zealand, Wilder's a big name in Alabama, but realistically, neither of them have been involved in events like Joshua Klitschko on that scale, and neither of them really, in my opinion, have the potential to be in events of that scale without guys like Anthony Joshua or Tyson Fury. Even if Parker and Wilder squared off against each other, you know, the fight wouldn't be that massive. It would be in a quiet casino in Las Vegas where they probably sell, I don't know, 5,000 or 10,000 tickets, and the crowd is very, you know, quiet, and the atmosphere is very muted. You know, for my money, the UK is where it's at for heavyweight boxing right now, and I think those guys are going to want a piece of that. I think they're going to see the amount of money. You know, they probably heard that Joshua and Klitschko supposedly both got paid 15 million for that fight. So it's an interesting question. Will the poor scorecards put them off? I think to an extent they will. But I think they'll get over that because of the amount of money involved. I also think, as the wire says, knockouts cause amnesia. And the fact that, you know, that fight didn't end in a scoring controversy, the fact that it ended in a knockout meant that those scorecards were probably less visible. You know, I know we're talking about it, the Boxing Hardcore online, but those scorecards are probably not what, you know, the average boxing fan is discussing in the pub right now. Let's put it that way. What I see happening, Darren, how I'd predict things will go, is I think Eddie Hearn will want to build both of their names in the UK. I would predict that Eddie Hearn has two individuals in his stable that he kind of views as expendable pawns. And those two individuals for me are Dillian Whyte and Tony Bellew. And for my money, Eddie Hearn has kind of showed that he's willing to sacrifice both of those guys already for the good of Anthony Joshua. I know Dillian Whyte wasn't an Eddie Hearn fighter, but Eddie Hearn threw Dillian Whyte in very early in his career against Anthony Joshua, when Dillian Whyte, you know, had really had inadequate preparation fighting against Brian Minto and supposedly was carrying an injury. I also think Dillian Whyte and Tony Bellew, especially, let's start with Dillian Whyte. I think Dillian Whyte's the kind of guy who's got potential. He could be a good fighter if built correctly, but he probably isn't the kind of fighter who's going to be a pay-per-view star on his own. He probably isn't the kind of fighter who's going to be a dominant world champion at any time soon. So I think he views Dillian Whyte as an expendable asset, and he may feed him to Anthony Joshua for a rematch. He also may be inclined to stick him in with someone like Wilder or Parker and try and sell that as a pay-per-view in Britain, with the result being that if Parker or Wilder were to get a win over Dillian White, it would massively build their profile in the UK and create a big fight when Anthony Joshua steps in the ring with them. Tony Bellew is the other expendable asset. I know Bellew's profile's at an all-time high. I know Bellew's a bit of a star in world boxing at present. But in my opinion, Eddie Hearn's already tried to cash him out when he fought David Haye. And I think that was very much for Joshua's benefit as well. I think Hearn was happy to chuck Bellew in with David Haye to try and build hype for a Joshua-David Haye fight that would maybe take place in future. Don't be surprised if we see Bellew versus Parker and White versus Wilder in the UK, or maybe even the other way around. Maybe Wilder versus Bellew. Obviously, they had their heated argument at the press conference or weigh-in, whatever it was. And maybe Dillian White Parker. You know, those are fights that have all been linked in the past. So I could see those guys squaring off, raising Parker and Wilder's profiles in the UK. You know, if White and Bellew, if one of them were to spring the upset, then even better from Eddie Hearn's perspective. But even if they don't, you know, they're two big fights in their own right. That's two big events for Eddie Hearn. It's big money. And then you can let Joshua fight the winners to unify titles. And, you know, there's even more money in those fights if someone like Wilder or Parker comes over to the UK and beats a Dillian White and beats a Tony Bellew or someone of that ilk. Ken has put Canelo versus Chavez Jr. How much of the weight advantage is going to affect the fight? For me, the weight is absolutely pivotal to this fight. I wouldn't be surprised if Chavez Jr. is, you know, just not a threat to Canelo because he's so weight drained and he's so ruined trying to make the weight. That is simply not a competitive fight. You know, he's going to have to cut. I think this is a guy who once missed weight at light heavyweight, and he's now fighting at 164.5 pounds. I mean, don't be surprised if he's so ruined at the weight he's got no punch power. Don't be surprised if he's so ruined at the weight he's got no punch resistance that the second Canelo digs in one of them body shots, he's out of there. Also, you know, if he makes the weight well and rehydrates well, the size has the potential to be an absolutely massive factor because Canelo's a guy campaigning at light middleweight, and we've seen the best of Canelo against guys who are light middleweight. So, you know, even if Canelo's a better fighter at 164.5, you know, the power that he's been hitting with has been, you know, very much linked to the size of the guys he's been hitting, and now he's going to be going up against a guy who's so much bigger than him. So I think size has the potential to be the defining factor in this fight. Either it's going to be that Chavez Jr. can make it a far more competitive fight because he's able to impose himself and use that size advantage, and Canelo won't be able to have the same success against a much bigger man, or Chavez Jr. will be so weight drained that he's not able to put up the full competition. I don't know which way it's going to go. I think it's a fascinating dynamic to the fight, definitely. I think it's a key factor without any doubt. Jimmy has put, is this the best period ever for British heavyweight boxing? If the top 5 British heavyweights fought the top 5 Americans, what would the score be? Do you know what, Jimmy? Thanks for the question. I'm not a boxing historian. I don't have as deep an appreciation of the great fighters of the past as people who'll be watching live now. So, you know, can I say, is it the best period ever? No, because I don't have the knowledge to say that, I guess. It's certainly the period that I've enjoyed the most. I mean, if you look at British heavyweight boxing, I think you can make a strong argument that AJ and Tyson Fury are the 2 best heavyweights in the world. I think there's a strong case that Hughie Fury could join that group as an elite heavyweight. You know, they could be the top 3 heavyweights in the world next year. I've got full confidence that that's how it could play out. Obviously, both Furies need to be active and come back from their problems, etc. In addition to that, you've got the return of David Haye. You've got guys like Dillian White, Tony Bellew, Derek Chisora, new guys coming through like Daniel Dubois, Joe Joyce potentially turning over as pro. Lawrence Okoli, very, very, very hot time for UK boxing. I mean, if the top 5 Brits fought the top 5 Americans, who are the top 5 Brits? So we say Fury, Joshua, Bellew, Hay, Fury, Joshua, and Huey, so we say, or maybe Dillian White versus who are the top 5 Americans? Would you say you go Wilder, Jennings? I don't even know who the top 5 Americans are. I guess you throw in Bermain Stavern. I know he's a Hayson, but I think he's I don't know. I think Boxer kept him down as American. Maybe guys like Malik Scott. I think the UK certainly has the cream of the crop out of those group, definitely. Rahul says, do you agree with Hatman that we are going into a new golden age of heavyweight boxing? I can see where he's coming from, but there are only 3 main players in the division. Even Parker and Wilder are relatively unproven. It's a waste that Hay lost to Bellew. Povetkin turned out to be on drugs. Ortiz has looked poor lately, and Fury has his demons. Rahul, I do agree with Hatman that we're in a potential age or golden age of heavyweight boxing. I really, really do. I watched his video on that actually, and I thought it was a good video. I take your points. I mean, Povetkin, for me, I've almost written him off the scene. I kind of agree that whilst Bellew beating Hay was a good story, Bellew is probably not a top class heavyweight. So, you know, the fact that he beat David Hay, maybe you could say it weakens the golden age potential, because David Hay Fury, David Hay Joshua, David Hay Wilder are, you know, mega fights. Obviously, but I mean, if Tyson Fury and Huey Fury are key players in this golden age of heavyweight boxing, so I think the fact that this is a golden age is kind of contingent on those 2 coming back and getting active. But if you throw in Parker and Wilder unproven as they are, with Joshua, Klitschko, Tyson Fury, Huey Fury, maybe you're returning David Hay, maybe you're returning Luis Ortiz. There's potential for some classic fights there. You know, there's some potential for mouth-watering fights. And don't be surprised, you know, if Fury beat Joshua, or if Wilder beat Joshua, or even if Parker beat Joshua, or Parker beat Wilder, or, you know, there's potential for huge rematches there, and, you know, rematches and trilogies, and huge amount of debate as to who's the number 1 in the division. It really is the potential. You know, I was watching boxing, let's say 5 or 6 years ago in the heavyweight division. I remember, you know, you had the Klitschko brothers at the top, and then there were, you look at the next set of names down, you were talking people like Valuev, Tony Thompson, and Ruslan Chagayev, and those sort of guys, you know. And it just feels like there's so many live chances now for people being number 1. So I agree. We'll have to see how it all plays out. Let's hope the fights get made. You know, fundamentally, Deontay Wilder's one of the big players. He hasn't fought anyone yet in his career of any note, really. Ortiz has looked poor lately. Furies have been inactive. So I don't think we're quite there yet, but hopefully Fury Klitschko is a shot in the arm that this heavyweight division needs. I think people are going to see that. They're going to see the money. They're going to see the occasion. They're going to see the hype, and they're going to want a piece of what those guys had on Saturday night. And hopefully that will lead to some of the big fights getting made. Daniel, how long do you think Eddie Hearn will prolong the Wilder fight? Will he keep building up AJ and milking him until it's inevitable? Or do you think he'll take the early gamble like he did with Klitschko? To be honest, Daniel, I'd kind of spin that question back on you and say, you know, Anthony Joshua, to be fair to him, is the one taking fights right now. Joshua fought, to be honest, you could make, well, no, Wilder has fought Stavern and Spilker, I guess. But, you know, my point is Wilder has never fought anyone like Vladimir Klitschko, anyone. And Joshua's done that at a much earlier stage of his career than Wilder had. You know, Wilder's fought nobody of that ilk. His best win's Stavern, really. So I'm less worried about Eddie Hearn milking Joshua. Eddie Hearn's chucked him in to fight Klitschko at this early stage when he didn't need to. You know, Klitschko wasn't a mandatory. Klitschko wasn't contractually obligated. Hearn threw him in. So let's see if Wilder steps up. Let's see if Wilder's advisors and people let him take that risk, because you're at the minute, the standard of Wilder's opponent has probably been going down rather than up. My inclination as well is that is probably not the most attractive fight. I appreciate in America that's viewed as a big fight. But honestly, I think the casual boxing fans don't really know who Deontay Wilder is over here. His profile isn't actually that large. Joshua versus Bellew, Joshua versus Fury, Joshua versus White. These are all actually bigger fights, bigger commercial fights in the UK. And Joshua was able to command the lion's share of the purse for those fights. I imagine if Wilder came over, he'd want a 40% or a 50% split, you know, whereas Dillian White, they could probably get for £1 million or £500,000 or something like that. So, you know, I'm not sure Wilder is next. I'm actually not sure it's the fight that it's not. Wilder Joshua is a fantastic fight. Don't get me wrong, but for me, it's not as attractive a fight as Fury versus Joshua, or so we still see. I don't suspect that fight happens this year. Let me put it this way. Dan has put Eubank Jr. has gone quiet. Are ITV having pay-per-view doubts? Well, apparently the numbers that they did were not exceptional first time round. I've heard rumours, and again, only rumours, nothing confirmed, of 60,000 or 80,000, something of that nature. So, you know, it sounds like ITV will put their foot down and will want a far better opponent to Reynold Quinlan in order to go again with another pay-per-view. So that might be why they've gone quiet, contemplating their next moves, or, you know, looking for a better opponent. The fact that Eubank Senior was looking at Eubank Junior versus Bellew perhaps tells you that they're not absolutely wedded to that ITV pay-per-view platform, because obviously that would be a fight on Sky. Dan's also asked, Huey and Peter silence on pullout. They waiting for it to brush over. Yeah, very much keen to see if they do. Very much keen to see if they do break their silence on that. I imagine they're going to stick very, very closely to the injury. It would not be good to derogate from the injury line, given that they pulled out of the fight on that basis, and they need to retain their position as mandatory, which I understand is going to be enforced. So I suspect with that being the case, it's very, very unlikely that we're going to hear anything more. Dan says, why does Eddie Hearn keep letting Linares wipe out his stable? Luke Campbell next to lose to him. Well, I did think that when Linares was over, you know, I did think, bloody hell, he's done Mitchell, he's done Crawler, and I think he'll do Campbell if he comes over. I think Linares is a class fighter. I guess the options for Luke Campbell are possibly not the most attractive. I mean, there aren't really huge names in that lightweight division. I think he loses to Garcia. I think he loses to Linares. Those are kind of the top two. The other fights, like Robert Easter Jr., they're risky fights. You know, these are not gimme fights, but they're guys with zero profile. Luke Campbell isn't exactly the most marketable type character, so maybe Eddie Hearn's got limited routes to go with Luke Campbell, and he's prepared to chuck him in and risk him. I guess even though Linares is not a superstar in terms of commercial value, the fact he's been over and beat Crawler, the fact he's been over and beat, Mitchell, at least give him some profile. So if Campbell was to spring the upset, it would be an upset in my opinion. It would create value. Dan says, Joshua under Rob McCracken, is this a good fit? I think I'll have to see more. I was quite critical of Rob McCracken's corner work, and everyone else I've listened to has, been highly complimentary about it. So maybe I need to review that, and I think we'll need to see more fights with them together before, I can really state my colours to the mast on that one. Understand that Rob McCracken's kind of always been Joshua's trainer behind the scenes. It's more that he's taken over the role of lead cornerman from Tony Sims. But apparently the backroom training hasn't really changed very much. So maybe it's just corner work as opposed to training that's actually the difference there. Dan says that Froch's defence, who was obviously trained by McCracken, was never the best, and this is where Joshua needs to work. I guess that's a fair point, Dan, yeah. Rob has put, evening Rob has put, will you finally compare the punch stats for Joshua Klitschko? To be honest, the punch stats don't really interest me. I did see one clip about power punches landed where it had Joshua massively outlanding Klitschko on power punches. But from my perspective, what happened there is Joshua had Klitschko hurt on a number of occasions. And when he did, he absolutely unloaded the gun, you know, and maybe threw 10, 15 power punches back to back. So do those stats on their own really tell a story? Do they make me think that either guy was ahead? Not really. I mean, it doesn't surprise me if Joshua was throwing and landing a lot more power punches. Joshua was kind of the sort of mauler type, or he took that up in the fight. You know, he wasn't looking to box on the back foot with Klitschko, certainly, whereas Klitschko was more the jabber type. So there you go. Oh, Rob says he meant in comparison to the Fury fight. Okay, I haven't done that, Rob, I'm afraid. I'll have to cover that on a separate video where I've sort of looked it up in advance. Okay, Jay Beats, evening mate, says, has the AJ Klitschko fight given you a new perspective on how AJ would match up against Wilder? Could Wilder come in trying to box? Not really, no. I don't think that Wilder poses the same problems as Vladimir Klitschko. I appreciate that from a kind of first look perspective, Wilder's long like Klitschko. He's got a jab like Klitschko. He's got a big right hand and a lead left hook like Klitschko. I think it's the subtleties in Wilder's game that are going to mean he's not going to cause the same problems. I don't think he's got the technical footwork and the judgment of range of Vladimir Klitschko. I think Wilder would be a lot easier to hit than Vladimir Klitschko. And I think whilst Wilder does certainly have attributes that Klitschko doesn't have, in terms of youth, in terms of will to win, that's unfair, actually. What I'm trying to get at is I think Wilder would have finished Joshua in the 6th if he got him in that position that Klitschko had. I think whilst Wilder does have certain attributes, on the whole, it's possibly more the technical pedigree of Klitschko that caused Joshua the problems. And I don't think Wilder poses those threats to Joshua. Rob has put, what are your thoughts on if a fighter like Andy Ruiz would have a chance versus Joshua? I don't know what you mean by a fighter by Ruiz. I'm sorry I butchered both of your questions, Rob, but I don't know if that you mean like a fighter who's short like Ruiz, a fighter who's got hand speed like Ruiz, a fighter, you know. But let's say Andy Ruiz himself. I wouldn't really give Ruiz too much of a chance against a guy like Joshua. I look back to that Joseph Parker fight, and I actually think Parker should have won that fight with relative ease. But Parker actually made some fairly rookie errors during spells in that fight, which made that fight far more competitive. For me, Parker was the far superior operator in that fight. You know, he just didn't keep Ruiz at bay with his jab. He didn't, you know, commit to that jab enough. He didn't really stick to his boxing and got sucked into some unnecessary stuff. And I actually think the size advantage Joshua would bring to the table would probably be enough to nullify a guy like Andy Ruiz. But, you know, it's not a fight that I'm really calling out for. I think there are fights for Andy Ruiz. I think he needs one or two decent wins before he, you know, steps up to world title level again. Alex has put, can AJ be as big as McGregor in terms of modern combat sports? I think he can be bigger than Mayweather, but he's closing on McGregor level, I think. To be honest, Alex, I don't really follow MMA. I don't have a great appreciation of how big Conor McGregor is in terms of pay-per-view buys, in terms of ticket sales and that sort of thing. I would have naively said that Joshua is probably already bigger than Conor McGregor, to be honest. I would imagine more people know Conor McGregor. Sorry, more people know Anthony Joshua than Conor McGregor. I certainly get more women talking to me about Anthony Joshua. I get more football fans talking to me about Anthony Joshua. I think Conor McGregor's known as, like, he's got a few viral videos on YouTube, you know, that have gone mega. But for me, I think Anthony Joshua's kind of already surpassed that, if I'm completely honest. If he hasn't, I certainly believe he can do. Yeah. Gavin has AJ got a conditioning problem? We've seen him do the Frank Bruno a few times. At the start of the 6, he spat his gum seal out because he wasn't ready to engage. Gavin, you're spot on. And I did notice that as well, how he spat his gum seal out. I think that was tactical. And I actually think that was fairly clever, because I think he was struggling at that point. And the worrying thing about that, Gavin, is it's not just that he ran out of gas when he was trying to close on Klitschko. The bigger worry was it was exactly the same thing as we saw in the Dillian White fight. So that showed that there was a problem early on in their career, and Joshua and his team haven't learned from that. Or if they have learned from it, they failed to implement the necessary changes. Because, yeah, Joshua was a state in round 6. And, you know, let's be honest, he was very, very lucky to come out of that round. So there's a huge conditioning problem there for me. I think he's too heavy set. It is very hard to fight 12 rounds for any man. But to do that when you're the size of Anthony Joshua, with muscles the size of Anthony Joshua's, is, for me, it's not a boxing build, it's a gym build. Tyson Fury may look out of shape. You know, when Tyson Fury fought Vladimir Klitschko, he had more of a flabby stomach than a six-pack. But did we see Tyson gas? Did we see Tyson run out of speed? No. You know, I've never seen Tyson, for all of his out-of-shape gas, like we saw Joshua gas. And for me, that's a product of the unnecessary muscle. I've seen one comment in the chat. I'm not going to the chat because I'm going through the stuff on my social media first. But the worrying thing, Rob's put, the worrying thing was Vlad didn't even throw body shots. Imagine if that was there. And that's exactly right. Imagine if Joshua is in against a body puncher who bank worked to the body over and over again. Yeah, how much worse would that problem be? So I think it's a real issue. I think he should look to lose some of that muscle and try and come in a bit leaner. Gavin's also asked about Tyson Fury's voice. I can see that's been answered in the chat, but yeah, apparently he got a larynx injury in sparring, which is why he sounds so croaky. Michael, hello Michael, has put, does Wilder really want the big fights? He never calls any fighters out unless he's put on the spot or questioned. Actions speak louder than words, Michael. I'm prepared to give him another chance. You know, Wilder, to his credit, and we forget about this because the fight didn't happen, Wilder travelled to Povetkin's backyard to fight Povetkin. In a fight that I picked Povetkin to win, and I think probably the majority were picking Povetkin to win. That was a huge fight. Wilder made the effort to go and take it. He pulled out because Povetkin failed the test. As a result, I'm prepared to give him a bit more slack. He's also had injuries, etc. But actions speak louder than words. You know, I saw a guy who looked very, very excited at the prospect of a Wembley fight, at the prospect of fighting Anthony Joshua. I saw a guy who was buzzing and calling out unification fights. The proof will be in the pudding. Will he take these fights? Will we see Wilder step up? Will we see Wilder face these kind of guys? My prediction is yes, because I kind of feel he's had all the learning fights he can have, and really it's now time to take these fights while he's at his peak. I don't think he's going to improve more. I think he's got the benefit of experience. What's he at? 37, 38 fights. I think we just need to see him thrown in at the deep end and see whether he'll sink or swim. And that's where the money is. You know, Wilder can make more in a fight with Joshua than he's made from his other 37 or 38 fights combined. And I say that confidently. So I think he does want the big fights. Wilder always strikes me as a guy with immense self-belief. I genuinely believe he'd be going to face Joshua believing he'd win. Let's see. I'll give Wilder the benefit of the doubt for now. We need to see him in with better opposition to build that fight with Joshua, or UK opposition. You know, I'm not saying Dillian White or Bellew are, you know, top 10 heavyweights. Neither of them are. But I guess that's at least a major profile building fight. Michael, another Michael, evening Michael, says, would love to know, Tom, your thoughts on the Anthony Joshua win before the Fury Vlad. Okay. Would love to know your thoughts on the Anthony Joshua win. Before the Fury Vlad fight, it was labelled as a victory for boxing if Fury beat Vlad. But before the Anthony Joshua versus Vlad fight, I felt it would be a victory for British boxing if Vlad won, as I felt it would loosen Matchroom's grip on the current landscape. I'll disagree with you there, Michael. I get your point, and I understand why. Anthony Joshua is the kind of figure that can take our sport of boxing to new levels. I think there's a tendency for hardcore fans to not like him because it's led to a load of casual fans saying he's the greatest fighter of all time and he'd smash up Tyson Fury and Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali in the same evening. But this is a guy who the whole nation is talking about. This is a guy who's on all sorts of TV programs, in all sorts of magazines, making massive waves. And he can drive huge money into the sport. He can create opportunity for the sport. He can raise the profile of the game to an entirely new level. And for me, if Vladimir had won that fight, the potential for massive fights to come out of that is much less than Joshua winning that fight. Because with Joshua winning the fight, there's now just astronomical fights out there, like Tyson Fury fight, like the Wilder fight that we've already discussed on this show tonight. If Vlad had won, yes, it would have cast the scene open, but he's 41 years old. He's a guy who's been on the scene for 15 years already. I think if Vlad had won, the opportunity for those mega fights, I mean, with a Fury Wilder fight, a Fury fight or a Wilder fight, they wouldn't be monstrous pay-per-view events. They wouldn't be huge ticket selling events. So I think it's better for the sport Joshua has won because of the potential super fights that can come out of it. The fact that Joshua may have 5 or 10 years ahead of him even, and how sort of marketable and loved Joshua is. It can drive new fans to the sport. Emil has put, how does Joshua deal with Wilder's long straight right, which is arguably the best in heavyweight boxing? AJ is the superior boxer of the two, but I think this punch could be a problem for him. I don't really believe that Wilder's long straight right is superior to Vladimir Klitschko's long straight right. I actually think in certain ways Wilder's punch is slightly more telegraphed. Vlad was guilty of telegraphing that left hook, but I actually thought his right hand cross was very, very effective. So I don't necessarily think that Wilder's long straight right is going to pose different challenges to Vlad's. I actually think Vlad's could potentially be more of a threat because I think his judgment of range combined with his footwork is probably better than Wilder's. And I think the way he sets that punch up with his jab is more dangerous than Wilder's. So for me, it's not something that immediately I worry about. I think that's a fight where both guys really want to be on the front foot. For me, neither of those guys are effective at letting go of offense on their back foot. I look at that Joshua Vlad fight. For me, Joshua wasn't letting go of effective aggression when Vlad was coming forward. And I could say the same about multiple Deontay Wilder fights, such as the Gerald Washington fight. So I think one of the keys is Joshua to come out, bring a bit of pressure, put Wilder on the back foot. Even if Wilder is able to get off that straight right when he's moving backwards, I don't believe it's as hurtful a punch. Similarly, if Wilder can come out, establish his jab and get Joshua going backwards, I think Joshua is a guy who is far, far less effective on the back foot. So for me, that would be a key to that fight. Jack's put, do you think James Toney would make a good comeback opponent for Fury? He said in the past month that Fury is garbage and he would be charged with murder if they ever fought. I think James Toney would be a terrible comeback opponent for Tyson Fury. Realistically, Tyson Fury now at 25 stone would have far, far too much for James Toney. James Toney you know, really needs to retire, and he shouldn't be allowed to be boxing anyone with a pulse, let alone a guy at the very top of the sport. Lewis says, if you could make any fight happen in the world boxing, what would it be and why? Only active boxers. Well, for me, the biggest fight in world boxing is Fury versus Joshua, Tyson Fury versus Joshua, Lewis. If we're saying Tyson Fury doesn't count because he's not an active boxer, I would absolutely love to see a Billy Joe Saunders versus Chris Eubank Jr. rematch. I think those two are made for each other. They're a match made in heaven in terms of selling a fight. I think it's a brilliant fight. It's a competitive fight. The styles gel well, and I'd absolutely love to see that one, mate. Pat has put, which, if any, heavyweights do you think could have stopped Joshua following the knockdown, assuming that the heavyweight replaces Vlad just after the knockdown happens? Hypothetical. Cheers, Pat. Right, so for this question, we're going to say that this heavyweight has survived the knockdown that Vlad suffered in the 5th. So they're tired, they've been hurt, and they've scored the knockdown against Joshua. Now, I'm going to caveat it by saying I don't think a lot of these heavyweights would have survived the knockdown in the 5th, and I don't think a lot of the heavyweights should have put Joshua down in the 6th. But if they had, I think there's a number of heavyweights who would have stopped Joshua there. Parker, Wilder, David Haye. All of those guys are very good finishers. All of those guys are guys with fast hands. They're guys who punch with bad intentions. Funnily enough, when Vlad was looking to finish, I thought he smothered his range. I thought he was struggling to, he's smothering his work and struggling to find his range, not getting punches off cleanly. And I think those guys would have got Joshua out of there had they had him in that physical state. I wouldn't rule out a guy like Tyson Fury being able to stop him, because I think Fury might have found the clean work to get the referee to jump in, although I would acknowledge that some of the punches that Joshua took on the chin from Vlad, Tyson Fury wouldn't have the power to get him out of there. Keenan says, would like you to discuss the Vitali Vladimir comparison? How Vitali would have perhaps fared in the Fury and Joshua fights. A prime Vitali, that is, and post-knee surgery Vitali, two different fighters. So I like Vitali Klitschko. I've always thought Vladimir Klitschko was the superior of the two. Funnily enough, if they fought each other, I'd probably pick Vitali. But I think historically, Vladimir is the better of the two. I would say if they fought each other, I'd pick Vitali. But I would say if they fought the top 10 heavyweights currently active, I'd pick Vlad to beat more of those top 10 than Vitali, because styles make fights. So Vitali I view as an ultra hard guy, iron chin, much more iron chin than Vlad, much less courses than Vlad, much less structured than Vlad. A guy who, despite his size and range, would come for a war and would get involved in a scrap. Genuinely a fighter, if you like. Whereas Vlad, more the boxer, more the jabber. I think Vlad has the superior jab. I think Vlad has the superior speed. I actually think Vlad was the bigger puncher out of the two of them. Technically, Vladimir may be the more well-rounded out of the two. I think Vlad can move and box better. I think he can hit slightly harder, whereas I believe Vitali is maybe more adept on the inside, harder, a better chin, and more comfortable when the pressure's on, and more comfortable piling the pressure on himself. Vitali Klitschko, his resume, when you look back on it, is very thin. If you look at some of the fighters he was in against, a lot of these guys, if you think, like a lot of the unbeaten guys he went to fight, they just turned out not to be that great, didn't they? I mean, Chisora, I know Chisora wasn't beaten, was he? Fury beat him first, then Chisora beat him. But like guys like Odlanair Solis and Manuel Char, who were meant to be the next big thing, but kind of never got there. Whereas for me, guys like Vlad, the Vlad has been in with Haye, Pulev, Povetkin, You know, they're just a higher caliber of operator for me. I think Fury beats Vitali. I think Vitali sometimes had the potential to be a bit robotic. I think Vitali would have put more pressure and activity in than Vlad, but I think Fury would have maybe had too much for him in terms of movement and by awkwardness. I think I'm just going to go with Tyson Fury to beat Vitali. How would Vitali have flirted in the Joshua fight? Again, it's a styles mate fights thing. A peak Vitali would have beaten the Joshua on that night. I certainly think a peak Vitali would have finished Joshua in the 6th round. I think Vitali would have taken Joshua to darker places than Vladimir did. I think Vitali would have given Joshua more problems to the body and on the inside. And yeah, I think obviously Vitali's in his mid-40s now, but he would have been a threat to all of the guys in the heavyweight division. Damien's put question after the weekend. Hope you're doing well, Damien, mate. He's put after the weekend's fights, how do you see AJ v Pulev panning out? Do you give Pulev any chance? I don't, Damien, no. I think Pulev poses similar. I think Pulev poses similar problems to Vlad. I've always described Pulev as like a poor man's Vladimir Klitschko, if you like. You know, Pulev boxes quite similar to Vlad. He doesn't go to the body. He doesn't fight on the inside. Everything's behind the jab. Everything's the sort of technical boxing construct: move, jab, move, jab, move, jab. But he doesn't have the size of Vlad. He doesn't have the power of Vlad. I don't believe he's got the footwork of Vlad. So I believe that Joshua will make fairly easy work of Pulev. And based on the punch resistance Pulev showed in that Vladimir Klitschko fight, I think Joshua should be able to steamroll him, actually. And wouldn't surprise me at all if Joshua saw off Pulev in the first 4 or 5 rounds, actually. Do I give Pulev any chance? Well, I guess it's heavyweight boxing, but maybe a 10% chance. I don't think Pulev's a massive hitter. You know, he probably hits hard enough to catch Joshua if he is able to land on him. But I don't really see, you know, Pulev beating Joshua. No, not realistically. Okay, I think that concludes the questions that I've had on Facebook. I'm just going to switch to Twitter now and see what, if any, questions have come through. Okay, so got Damien's one. Right, okay. Bear with me. I'm just going to go to read out my Twitter. I think I've got about 10 more on Twitter, and then we'll go to the chat quickly. Okay, so questions from Jazz. Hope you're doing well, mate. Why would a rematch over Klitschko favour Anthony Joshua when it was Vlad who made the more major mental errors in this fight? I think Joshua's going to get better, Jazz, whereas Klitschko's going to get worse. Joshua has just had the experience of his first fight at the elite level. He's done well. He's made mistakes. He's learned from. He's a guy who is 27. He can still physically get better. The benefit of that fight and the benefit of that experience could make him more relaxed. He can probably learn from his mistake about unloading the gun and, you know, making sure he doesn't punch himself out. Whereas Vladimir at 41 is probably not going to be improving at this stage. Vladimir should have stopped Joshua in the 6th, as far as I'm concerned. The fact he couldn't pull the trigger then tells me it's unlikely he's going to be able to 6 months or a year down the line. Jazz also asked, given the history, particularly recently, of questionable scoring for matchroom fighters, would you be worried if you were Errol Spence? Yes. Yeah. I think Errol Spence is coming to knock Kell Brook out. I think that's his game plan. I think he thinks he's going to run through Kell Brook. If the fight goes to points and I've scored it 7-5 to Spence on my card, I will make Kell Brook a betting favourite to win the fight. So would I be worried if I was Spence? I guess so. Is Spence coming to outpoint Kell Brook? I doubt it. Kieran has put, if AJ didn't gas out and finish Vlad in round 5, what would everyone be saying about the fight? Would they call Vlad old and past it? Well, I don't know. I can't speak for the masses because I don't know what people will be saying. I personally saw enough of Vlad in the early rounds to tell me that that was still an elite heavyweight. You know, you look at the guys that Joshua has been in with previously, even guys like Dillian White and Dominic Breazeale, who are borderline top 20. You look at the way those guys move and the way those guys jab, and you compare it to Vlad, and you compare how Vlad moved in the first 4 rounds. And if you compare it to how Vlad jabbed in the first 4 rounds and the power Vlad hit with, you can see that Vlad is on a different planet of ability to those sort of guys as far as I'm concerned. So for me, if Joshua had stopped Klitschko in that 5th round, no, I wouldn't be saying that Klitschko got old overnight at all. And it would have been very impressive. Let me see what else has come through. Jazz has put, do you agree with the odds? So one bookmaker, I think, I can't pull up the thing now because my internet connection, but bookmaker has priced Tyson Fury as a 9-4 underdog against Anthony Joshua. So they're making Tyson Fury approximately a 30% chance against Joshua, with Joshua as a 70% favourite. Do you know what? I think from a bookmaking perspective, Jazz, they've got to anticipate that the vast majority of bets are going to be, they probably got to anticipate that the vast majority of bets are going to be on Tyson Fury. Sorry, are going to be on Anthony Joshua. So because of that, they've got to price their books accordingly. If they honestly felt it was a 50-50 fight, but all the money was going on Joshua, they'd want to be cutting the price of Joshua to make sure they didn't risk such a big payout. Tyson Fury at present, I can see why people are quoting it 70-30. He's been inactive. There's been all sorts of pullouts. There's been all sorts of health issues, physical health issues, mental health issues. The guy's 25, 26 stone. He's out in Marbella with Billy Joe Saunders. He's just not really living the Warriors lifestyle, is he? Look, if Tyson Fury comes back and proves that he's still the Tyson Fury of old, based on some of the rawness in Joshua's game, I think Tyson Fury should be a favourite in that fight. But he won't be, because bookmakers base their odds on public perception and on the weight of public money. Joshua is the fan favourite. Joshua is the celebrity out of the 2 of them. And I think that's why the odds are in that fashion. Look, if the 2 guys fought and I had confidence it was going to be the same Tyson Fury who beat Vladimir Klitschko, and Fury was available at 2-1, I'd be piling in, let's put it that way. Boxing to the bone. Triple G versus Canelo, who wins and how? I believe Canelo's an extremely tough man. I believe he's vulnerable to a jabber, to a mover. I believe if Triple G implemented the game plan he used against David Lemieux, he could have real success against Canelo and win on points. I think Canelo could well go to distance with Triple G. I don't think Triple G is getting any better at this stage. Obviously, you could suggest some signs of slippage in the Brook Jacobs and Jacobs fights, but regardless of what you think about that, Triple G's now 35. As a middleweight, he's not going to be improving at 35. I do think in terms of his boxing pedigree, his jabbing and moving game, he can outpoint Canelo. I do. So I would pick Triple G in that fight. Vox has put, how good do you think Povetkin is, and do you think he can become a heavyweight champ? For me, Povetkin's whole career has been marred by this performance-enhancing drug saga. Povetkin at his best was very good. If Povetkin hadn't failed that drug test, well, he'd have fought Wilder, which, I guess would have decided whether he'd be a heavyweight world champion or not. But realistically, I'd have Povetkin comfortably in the top 5 heavyweights in the world, probably in the top 3. He's got a very good resume. But Povetkin's not a young man anymore, and he's going to have major political issues becoming a world champion. Who's going to want to fight Povetkin with some of the controversy that's marred his career? So do I think he'll become a world champion? I'm going to say probably not, based on politics and based on the fact that his card is well and truly marked. Stefan's put, who do you consider the biggest star in boxing, AJ or Canelo? I don't think I've got full appreciation of how big Canelo is in Mexico and how big he is in the States as a result. But I'm going to lean to Anthony Joshua. And this is based, as I say, on instinct rather than on anything else. I think when Anthony Joshua fights, it's a world event. I mean, the fact that Joshua's fight against Klitschko was broadcast on both HBO and Showtime is remarkable. If you consider how many fights have actually enjoyed being shown on both. Whereas, you know, Canelo Chavez Jr., that's not going to be on our, I don't know, maybe is it on Sky or Box Nation or BT Sports? I don't know, but that's not a massive fight over here. That's not a fight that people are going to be watching in their droves. We'll have to see. Maybe we'll see some pay-per-view figures for Canelo and Chavez Jr. that blow what Joshua's done out of the water. I know the pay-per-views are a lot more expensive over there, so I'd say it's close, but I'd lean with Joshua. I think Joshua's the more marketable out of the two. I think globally, the fact that he's got, you know, English is his first language is very, very helpful in selling him globally. And I think people love a heavyweight, and I think people love a knockout artist. Canelo, he's a big puncher. He's certainly not a heavyweight. And I don't think he's a pure knockout artist like Anthony Joshua. And obviously the fact that he's not naturally English speaking, as in his first language, I do think that possibly affects his marketability on a global footing to some extent, definitely. Don't Read the Sun has asked me, which other British fighters have the potential to sell out Wembley, and what are the best potential domestic matchups in the sport? Well, let's start. Best potential domestic matchups, for me, it's the ones with the history. So, obviously, you've got Joshua Fury. I mean, that almost goes without saying. Saunders Eubank, the Gale Groves, big rematch there. Brooke Khan. Yeah, those are the absolute top ones, I guess, in terms of heat and in terms of hype and in terms of commercial value. I'm trying to think if there's any other obvious ones that I've missed. I think the Cruller-Flanagan fight, you know, it's probably, if anything, that the interest in that has probably dropped. Who is the potential to start at Wembley? I'm not sure any fighter has the potential to sell out Wembley unless it involves Joshua. I don't think the Gale Groves or Eubank Saunders sell out Wembley. I think Khan Brook could probably sell out Wembley, or certainly do something like 70 or 80,000. I think if that fight were to be made, especially if both guys look good, you know, especially if Brook smashed up Errol Spence and then Khan had one or two convincing comebacks, I do think that that's a fight that could come close to selling out Wembley. But I think that's the only obvious one. And Don't Read the Sun's also put, if you could hold one belt in a division, which would you choose and why? I'd be the WBC heavyweight champ. It's just the most iconic as far as I'm concerned. Paul has put, can you see Eddie Hearn setting up Wilder versus Bellew as a pre-fight to Joshua? Eddie loves a revenge job. Absolutely. Or Parker Bellew, you know, either one of the two. I think that's very, very possible. Same with Dillian White, Paul. I think Dillian White could get chucked in with either Bellew or, not Bellew, sorry, either Parker or Wilder, to really raise those guys' profiles over here so that the pay-per-view fights with Joshua are even bigger and the pay-per-view numbers and ticket sales are absolutely massive. Whitboy has put, what mega fights are out there in the heavyweight division? Fury and Hay are out for ages. Is Wilder big enough? Wilder Joshua is a mega fight. In terms of mega fights, it's probably Wilder and Fury, as far as I'm concerned, that are the mega fights. Wilder versus Joshua, Fury versus Joshua. Those are the ones that I consider mega fights. Parker's profile isn't quite there yet. I think if he came and beat Bellew or maybe fought Wilder then that becomes a much bigger fight, definitely. Lewis put, what's your favourite fight of all time? I could be, I don't know. That's a hard one to answer, Lewis. Favourite fight of all time? Gatti Ward, I guess. I know that's very, very obvious, so I apologise for being so predictable, but that's the one that's really gets the blood pumping. Jay has put, do you think Fury Joshua is the biggest possible matchup in the world right now? Simple question, simple answer, Jay. Yes, I do. Nathan's put, do you think Eddie Hearn making Fury versus Joshua is a big money risk with the Fury's history of pulling out? Very good question. And it is. It is. It is. I mean, I actually don't think that fight is feasible due to the Fury's situation at present. I think Tyson Fury's got to come back and prove his well-being and have 2 or 3 fights without pulling out. And at the minute, there's so many issues with the licensing. And is he banned? Is he not banned? Has he got a license? Has he not got a license? Is he pulling out? Is he not pulling out? I actually think we need to see him come back and have 2 or 3 warm-up fights before it is feasible to make that, because you can't go and book Wembley Stadium and sell 90,000 tickets just for someone to pull out. Definitely. Matt, hello, Matt has asked a bit more about Parker versus Bellew. I think this is the next fight for Parker. I think it's a very, very sensible fight for Parker. I do think. Do you know what? I think it's a sensible fight for both guys. I do think Parker wins the fight. I think that Bellew would really, really struggle with Parker. But I think it's the best matchup for Bellew because Parker's not one of these giants. He's not 6'6", 6'7", who's going to be looming over Bellew. I think there's a danger if Bellew fights a Wilder or a Joshua or a Fury. I think there's a danger for Bellew. He just gets kept at the end of the jab and just eats the jab all night. And really gets smashed up from range because he is a cruiserweight essentially. Whereas I think with Parker, there's less of a chance of that happening. I think Parker's a smaller guy, or Parker factually is a smaller guy in terms of his height and range. I also think Parker maybe neglects committing to his jab compared to some of those other guys. So I think Parker's the best fight for both guys. It's Bellew's most realistic chance of winning a world championship. I think Bellew would find it easier to land on Parker than the other guys. I think from Parker's perspective, it's the biggest fight of his career in terms of profile. It's got the potential to really, really boost his profile, especially in the UK. So I think that's key. But I do think Parker wins the fight. I think Parker would have to improve his jab. I think he'd have to be mindful of keeping his defenses tight. But he's the superior boxer. He's got the superior speed. He's got superior power, especially at heavyweight. And I think if Parker jabbed Bellew and unloaded combinations on him, I think Parker could get Bellew out of there for my money. There we are, guys. Wow. I was thinking this would be half an hour. We've gone for 75 minutes already. Bloody hell. Those were all the questions that I got asked on social media. Once again, do take the time to add me on Facebook. Link to my Facebook profile in the description box below. And also give me a follow on Twitter as well. So, next time we do one of these, I'll post it up on online so you can get your questions in early as well. Let's go to the chat quickly. There's so many people in the chat. There's 250 of you guys watching live now. Massive shout out to everyone watching live. I'm on 82 thumbs up. So please take the time to hit the thumbs up. Try and get me to over 100 before we end this live stream, if you guys are up for that. What I'll do then is I'll go to the chat now. I'm not going to answer. There's going to be too many questions to answer everyone. So if you want your question read out, put hashtag BG in the question so I know you want it read out. I'm probably not going to answer questions like, I don't know, what's your favorite scary movie? Because there's going to be too many of them. But we'll go through it and we'll take some questions live from the chat. Just put hashtag BG. Will's put Fury has already lost 18 pounds. Thoughts? Hashtag BG. Well, I'm pleased. Doesn't surprise me. I think when you're as heavy as Fury is, 25, 26, 27 stone, the first 2 stone is probably quite easy. It probably sifts quite quickly when you're that weight. Let's hope it's the start of something positive. Let's hope he can get down to some sort of shape by the end of the year, perhaps. Yes, we're over 100 thumbs up. So cheers to everyone who clicked that. Kire says, BG, would a prime Klitschko have beaten Joshua? Yeah, I think a younger Vlad would have found the punches to get him out of there in the 6th. Yeah, I do. Although the funny thing is I'm assuming you're talking Vladimir Klitschko. So a prime Vladimir Klitschko, he actually showed peak mental resilience and peak chin in that fight the other day. So funnily enough, maybe he wouldn't have beaten Joshua, because a prime Vladimir would have stopped Joshua in round 6, yes. But if you look at a peak Vladimir, that peak Vladimir may well have been stopped by Joshua in the 5th. In fact, if you look at, I don't think any Vladimir I've seen in history would have shown the mental resilience and the chin to have survived that 5th. So I'm going to go no, actually. Craig says, BG, do you think Chavez Jr. would have been at the top of the tree already if he was mentally right and put the work in? And do you think Roach's tactics or lack thereof will be Chavez's downfall? No, Craig, I don't. I actually don't think Chavez Jr. is an elite boxer. He's a big guy. He hits hard. He's tough as hell. He's shown a great chin in the past, although there's some signs that's been cracked a little bit. But no, I don't believe he's an elite boxer. I don't believe he's an elite technician. So no, I think fundamentally he's a limited fighter. Wallpaper Flembot has put, do you think Vladimir Klitschko will fight again if the Anthony Joshua fight doesn't happen? I think he looked good versus Joshua and could have won if he wasn't so cautious in the 6th. I agree. I think he will fight again. I think the Joshua rematch is the most likely. And I think he will probably want to go out on a win. So I think if the Joshua rematch doesn't happen, I'd still expect him probably to have a fight in Germany, maybe against a fringe contender, Emmanuel Char, someone of that nature, and go out on a high note. EFC Joe says Ortiz versus Wilder, hashtag BG. Someone asked me about it, and I've forgotten who it was, so apologies if that was you. I think Ortiz at this stage has a chance against both Wilder and Joshua. He's a southpaw. He's got huge amateur experience. He punches hard. But I'd actually make him the underdog in both of those fights. He's slowed for me. There's a lot of rumours that he's a lot older than he lets on. And I think we're seeing signs of a flagging career and age in his recent performances. I think he's lost a step. I think the Ortiz we saw against Malik Scott and Dave Allen was noticeably worse than the Lewis Ortiz we saw against Tony Thompson and Bryant Jennings. And I think Thompson and Jennings were actually a higher class of opposition. He's also a smaller heavyweight than you'd think. I actually think he'd be dwarfed by Joshua and Wilder. And I think those guys, with their ability to fight from range, could cause him real problems. He's good on the inside. He's good against stationary opponents. And whilst Wilder and Joshua aren't stationary, what they're not is elite footwork artists. So I don't rule Ortiz out of it. He's certainly got a good puncher's chance. But I'd make him an underdog in both of those fights. Team Grows, BG, your opinion on Vlad's weight? Do you think if he came in a bit heavier, he could have been better for punch power and punch resistance? Obviously, he was able to move well and look good at 240. No, I don't think he should have come in heavier. I think Vlad showed excellent punch resistance in that fight. And I also think he showed pretty good punch power. I thought Vlad's punch resistance was absolutely superb, to be honest. Some of the punches he ate, that uppercut he took, the way he recovered from that, barrage of punches in the fifth, I think his punch resistance was bang on. As for punch power, maybe if he'd been 5 pounds heavier, but I don't think that made the difference. Some of the punches he landed on Joshua, that punch in the 6th round was huge. No, I think Vlad came in tactically at the right weight for me. Lewis says, is Hay over? I think if Hay doesn't get the Bellew rematch, it's very hard for him to come back. I don't see how David Hay's return generates interest without that Bellew rematch. I mean, he's not going to get a fight against one of the champions. I guess he could get a fight against the Briggs of Quendo winner, or something like that. But really, Hay's not going to get a Joshua or a Fury or a Wilder because he's lost to Bellew. His profile's low. He's viewed as beneath Tony Bellew at present. And people aren't going to risk taking a loss to David Hay. A guy like Deontay Wilder can't risk a fight with David Hay. Because if he lost to David Hay, he'd lost to the guy who lost to Tony Bellew, So I think Hay needs to come back and right that wrong. And if he can't get that rematch, I suspect it's very, very difficult for him. I really do. Right, sorry, I'm trying to... I'm well behind on the chat here. Apologies in advance if I can't come to your questions in the chat, guys. There's too many questions here for me to get through these all, I think. But I'm going to try and stay on as long as I can and get some more done. Let's have a look. Amir Khan's chin, fight of the year so far. It's one of 3. It's one of Boy Jones Jr., Poxton, Joshua Klitschko, Darrell Williams versus Jermaine Smile. Go Boy Jones Jr., Poxton, although I'd acknowledge one is Joshua versus Klitschko, obviously. Connor says, BG, do you think Joshua could take up Pulev quicker than Klitschko did? And is Dubois a future opponent for AJ? Yes, I do. I think Pulev would... I think Pulev is a poor man's Klitschko. I don't think he'd live with Joshua. I think he's got the same limitations as Klitschko, but without most of the strengths. Is Daniel Dubois a future opponent for AJ? I doubt it. Dubois is a kid. He's had 2 fights. He's looked decent but raw. I think Dubois he's had a very limited amateur pedigree. I think Dubois needs to have 20 fights before getting to British title level, really. At the minute, we just haven't seen anything from him. He's looked very, very good against very, very little. But no, I think he needs to be taken very, very slowly. Wouldn't like to see him being rushed and wouldn't really like to see him being considered as an AJ opponent in future. Karen has put, what would be a good weight for AJ if he's looking to go 12 rounds, BJ? I'd like to see him 10 pounds lighter, really. I'd like to see just the big biceps and the big back and the big chest just slightly reduced, be a bit leaner, a bit more functional. I actually think the physique that Vlad had would be better on Joshua than the one that Joshua had. EFC, who is the biggest puncher out of British super middleweight division, BG? Let's have a think. Who's in the British super middleweight division? Groves, De Gale, Fielding, Callum Smith, Eubanks, Martin Murray, George Groves. I think George Groves is an underrated puncher. Just pip George Groves over Callum Smith. Groves is a decent puncher. Remember that shot he landed on Carl Frost? And yeah, he's a bigger punch than he gets credit for, in my opinion, George Groves. JC Denton, do you think Frank Warren will be able to put bigger shows on now he's with BT, or does he not have enough big names? I think he will be able to put bigger shows on. I think this platform will allow him to get the bigger names. Eddie Hearn's beaten him to the punch on a lot of the Olympians, but there's still some Olympians to turn pro. There's guys like Joshua Buatsi. There's guys like Joe Joyce. Obviously, he's just signed Daniel Dubois. I think some key acid tests for Frank Warren in terms of signing more talent is what he does with the guys who've left Matchroom. Guys like Tyrone Nurse, guys like Josh Warrington. Those are real tests for Frank. If he doesn't do a good job with building those guys, it's going to be hard to it's going to be hard to get more talent to jump over. And it hasn't started overly well with Tyrone Nurse dropping a draw on an undercard. And we'll have to see how Josh Warrington looks in Leeds. I hope that he sells out with Warrington, because Warrington was a big fan favourite for the Matchroom guys. But yeah, all in all, I do think he'll be able to put on bigger shows. I think it's going to could be a bit of a circle, if you like, that it's going to attract bigger talent to his stable, and in turn that will create bigger shows. And he's probably creating a bigger budget already and creating more visibility. So yeah, I do. I think it's very positive for him. VK says, does David Price have similar problems as young Vlad but never found his Manny Stewart? Spot on. Absolutely spot on. And also David Price came to the game a hell of a lot older than Vlad. I think he was in his 30s when he turned pro, so there was less time. Jared says, BG, do you think Joshua drops the belt? I do. I think the Joshua Klitschko rematch is going to happen. So I don't get surprised if Joshua drops both belts. I'm particularly confident he'll get stripped by the IBF, because they're particularly vociferous in their approach to this. The WBA, the Luis Ortiz mandatory, I think they may be a bit more flexible. I haven't heard them call that mandatory straight away, and I think the IBF are the ones who are really strict. So I think most likely Joshua does get stripped to the IBF. PJB, should AJ fight in the USA or bring Wilder here? Wilder should come here. It's a much bigger fight over here. That's a fight that does $1.5 million pay-per-view buys here. I don't know how many pay-per-views buys that fight would do if it was in America now, but one thing I can tell you is it wouldn't do $1.5 million. And if you had the fight over there, it would massively negatively affect the pay-per-view buys that you'd get in the UK, because people will be less interested in watching the fight due to the time difference. So I think Wilder's got to come over here. The money's here. I mean, supposedly AJ and Vlad both got over 15 million for that fight. The same could be the case for a Wilder fight. The money's here, the fans are here. Wilder is not going to be selling 90,000 tickets in the States. King Off has put, BG, what do you think Amir Khan's next move is? Realistically, what do you think he'll do? What do you think he should do? He needs to get active. He needs to get in with a real opponent, a top 10 contender. And he needs to commit to boxing. If the guy wants to be a boxer, he needs to have 2 or 3 fights in relative succession, and he needs to look to make a very, very big fight, Amir Khan. To be honest, I've kind of lost interest in his boxing career at the minute. It just kind of seems that Kell Brook fight was there for the taking, and he didn't take it. He was linked to Manny Pacquiao in a fight that obviously wasn't going to happen. He's still calling out Mayweather periodically. I think if Amir Khan realistically wants to be a great boxer and a champion boxer, the guy must be in his 30s now. He can't be a young man anymore. If he's not 30, he must be close to 30. The time is now. He needs to get active now. He needs 2 or 3 fights. The sort of fights he's taken in the past, the Calazos, the Alexanders, the Algeris, that sort of level. And then he needs to step into a big fight. And if that Kell Brook fight is still there, well, I don't want to hype up that fight again. Lee Watts says, BG, can AJ take Wilder's power? I've never believed that Wilder's got superior power to Vlad. Wilder's got higher knockout percentage than Vlad, but he's fought a lot more cans than Vlad. And I actually believe that Vlad would have a higher chance of landing his power punches than Wilder, because his judgment of range is better, and the way he sets up his punches behind a jab is far better as well. So, yeah, the fact that AJ got through that fight with Vlad gives me confidence he could get through a fight with Wilder. Cameron says, BG, if Joshua were to beat all the current heavyweights, where would he rank at all time? Look, Joshua's 27 years old. If Joshua has 10 years of dominance and beats Fury, beats Wilder, beats Parker, beats the next generation coming through, he can definitely be the #1 heavyweight of all time. You know, I'm not one of these people who say that you can't be the #1 heavyweight of all time because Muhammad Ali is the #1 heavyweight of all time and nobody can ever beat Muhammad Ali. You know, Joshua's got 10 years of boxing ahead of him. Who knows what it's going to go? You know, at the minute, there still appears to be some frailties in his game. Stamina's a big one. Back foot is potentially one. Defense is potentially one. I'm not saying for a second that I believe he will be the #1 heavyweight of all time. But there's some massive, massive fights out there for him. And if he goes unbeaten and smashes them all up and goes 50-0, yeah, why can't he be the #1 heavyweight of all time? The potential's certainly there. Lucas says, Lucas, we've answered that one earlier, mate. Give it a look back and this will go up on the channel after it's you know, probably about an hour after it finishes, it will upload on the channel, so give it a look back. Joe answered that one. Joe, mate, again, give that one a look and it'll be up later. Alas, but what do you think Parker needs to improve on? I'd love to see AJ and Parker fight, but I don't think he's ready yet. Okay, 3 quick things. He's got a very good jab. He needs to commit to the jab. He needs to double it up. He needs to jab to the body, jab to the chest, jab to the head twice. He really needs to fight behind that jab. Number 2, defensiveness. Parker's got very limited head movement, very limited upper body movement. He's quite stiff defensively. He also doesn't keep his hands high enough. So you've got a guy whose head is rigidly up like this with his hands down. He's a counterpuncher's dream. He's very vulnerable to being caught when he throws punches. Third and finally, I don't think Parker likes it when he's under pressure. I don't think Parker is comfortable on the inside or on the back foot or when the pressure's up against him. You look back at that Takam fight, Parker wins every round where he's able to fight behind the jab. He loses every round where Takam's able to come forward and sit on his chest. He's either got to stop fighters from closing him down by committing to that jab and using his footwork, or he's got to improve his inside game. So there's 3 quick suggestions from my sofa. Stuart, BG, have you heard anything from the Fury camp regarding Huey's injury? I've heard it's a back injury. I've heard that he can resume training in 4 weeks, but nothing further on that. Triple D, anyone else think the heavyweight division is overrated? All contenders have been exposed cheats or Father Time has got them. No, totally disagree. For me, the heavyweight division is the most exciting division in boxing right now. You know, we've already discussed a lot of the characters and the potential in that division on this live stream, so I won't go over it again. But for me, the mega fights are there. The mega fights are there. VK says Canelo versus Lemieux in September if both win. Well, I hope not. I'd like to see Canelo versus Golovkin. The Canelo Lemieux fight doesn't really get me excited, if I'm honest. Kire says, would the Vlad that beat Hay have beaten Joshua? I've kind of answered that one earlier. I think that Vlad would have stopped Joshua in the 6th, but at the same time, I think that Vlad may well have been stopped by Joshua in the 5th. So I'm going to say no. EFC puts, who poses the biggest threat to Lomachenko out of Garcia and Linares? Garcia, because Garcia, I think Lomachenko's biggest problem moving up in weight isn't going to be skills, it's going to be size. And I think it's going to be the fact that his power won't be effective, and it's the fact that he's going to be taking bigger punches from bigger men. And Garcia's a very big puncher. He's a big puncher even at 140. Linares, he's not a light puncher, but he's also not a massive puncher. I think the strength and the power of Garcia would be a real problem for the smaller Lomachenko. Daniel says, BG, when will Paul Smith get the recognition he deserves? Moving on. Kono says, BG, Furman versus Brook, who wins? Great fight, that. Real tight. Obviously, kind of depends how Brook does against Errol Spence. I think there's a lot of questions about Kell Brook. Will he be the same fighter after the Golovkin loss? Will he be the same fighter back at 147, having blown up in weight, having to cut back down? I don't know. I really don't know. I think it's going to be, I think if Brook is back to his very best and proves that he's still got a future at 147, I think Kell Brook, I make a slight favourite in that matchup. I think stylistically, Furman would match up better for Brook than Brook does for Furman. Tom, BG, I think you was harsh on Ortiz in your post-Scott analysis, given that Scott was trying to survive. And although he isn't best, is one of the slickest heavyweights, I think it would be very different versus AJ. Yeah, but you've also got to factor in, Tom, that Ortiz couldn't close the gap on Scott. He's much bigger than Scott, and he's much more powerful than Scott. So whilst he isn't as slick as Scott, he's got more tools to keep Ortiz off him. The jab, the size, the range. Ortiz is getting older by the day. This guy is an old guy. He's probably getting worse. I think the signs of slip hits are really clear. And now he's just pulled out of a Derek Rossi fight with injury. So I think by the time that next fight comes along, I'm afraid Ortiz is a guy maybe we never saw the best of. Mart says, does Box Nation need to co-promote with Matchroom to have a stadium fight at Wembley? Yeah, I don't see how Box Nation is able to build a stadium fight at Wembley at this stage. The BT Sports deal will have to take off and revolutionise their business. I just don't see it. They don't have the fighters. They don't have the profile to promote an event of that nature. I don't know the ticket sales, but the rumoured ticket sales for Fury versus Vlad were too bad to be believed. So, let's see. If they couldn't sell out a fight of that nature, then it's going to be very difficult for them to sell out a fight at Wembley Stadium. Just having a look, see if there's any other ones in the chat. All right, last question we're doing tonight. We're going to Damien. BG, any concerns for BJS in his next fight with lack of dedication to training? Huge concerns, Damien. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. Tyson Fury and Billy Joe Saunders are not a combination made in heaven. These two guys, I'm sure they've been training hard in Marbella. Apparently Fury's lost a lot of weight already, but those two guys are not great influence on each other. Two guys who've got a bit of a history of questionable behaviour. Two guys who enjoy a beer and a burger, let's put it that way, with loads of money out in Marbella, is a worrying combination for me. Billy Joe Saunders, he doesn't have the frame of Tyson Fury, but it's arguable that for a man of his frame, he was in equally grotesque shape as Fury was. Probably not quite as bad, but similar level. I've got huge concerns for Billy Joe. Billy Joe's a guy who routinely hasn't learned from his mistakes. He's a real talent, but in every fight he gasses, in every fight he runs out of energy. We saw a terrible performance against him versus Akavov, having blown up in weight. Has he learned from his lesson? Has he stayed in the gym? No. He's blown up to 15, 16 stone. And This is the guy who was supposedly going in with Gennady Golovkin for his next fight. It's one thing making a mistake, but it's another one not learning from it and, you know, making the same mistake again. Saunders' talent and youth has got him through it at this stage of his career, but it will find him out at some point. So I've got major concerns for Billy Joe going forward. And I think, unfortunately, his lack of dedication will probably stop him from fulfilling his potential. Kurtsidis, I don't see as the man to beat Saunders. I think Saunders is... The other thing is I think Saunders may move to super middleweight because of his lack of dedication in terms of making the weight. And I think that would be a disaster. Saunders is small for middleweight. But I think Kurtsidis will be target practice for Saunders. I think Kurtsidis swings and misses wildly. And for a slick guy who's very awkward, very difficult to hit, Kurtsidis will get counterpunched all day long by a guy like Billy Joe. I think Billy Joe will be able to pick him off, really. But I do have huge concerns over Billy Joe and his future. Guys, I think that's me done. Ended up doing an hour 40 there, which was longer than anticipated. But, you know, I appreciate that so many people ask questions, shows that there's a lot of interest. Apologies if you asked the question in the chat and I missed it. I did try and go to everyone who put #BG after their questions, but there were so many coming through even, that I may have missed a few. So apologies if that was the case. Up to 250 of you watching live. If you are watching live, do hit the thumbs up button to support this and watching more visibility. If you're watching this after this has gone up, after it's been uploaded to the channel, help me try and get this one. Let's go for 250 likes on this one. Try and help me get up to that by pressing the thumbs up button. If you've enjoyed this, do hit the subscribe button so you can check out all of my other stuff. We're doing the podcast tomorrow, 8:30. We're going to have, hopefully, I know it's just myself and Irish Tom last week. Hopefully we'll have some more of the panel on this week, and we'll obviously be dissecting you know, all of the fights from last week, as well as looking ahead to some of the stuff going on. I can see a lot of kind comments in the chat saying that they've enjoyed the show, so really appreciate everyone who joined in tonight. Thanks to Gerard, thanks to Damien, thanks to all the guys in the chat. Jet's going to be on the panel tonight, tomorrow night. I don't know if Seri is, Matt. I don't know. We'll be back tomorrow evening, live at 8:30 for the podcast. And thanks to everyone for joining in. Hope everyone has a good evening. All the best.